The morning fog drifted in from the Pacific, curling through the tall evergreens and over the steep, weathered cliffs of Mornington, Oregon. It moved like a ghost across the town, gentle, familiar, but always slightly haunting. From the second-story window of a modest, sea-worn house perched above the rocky shore, Frank Sanders stood silently in his daughter's bedroom, watching the mist swallow the lighthouse point in the distance. The landscape had once comforted him, a sanctuary of beauty and solitude, but since the spring of 1990, it had become a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. His daughter, Alicia, vanished without a single trace. For 22 years, her room had remained untouched, preserved like a sacred shrine. Time moved forward in the world beyond these walls, but inside everything stood still. Posters from the late 80s were still tacked to the walls, edges curling with age. Her neatly arranged desk still bore open notebooks filled with dreams and half-finished essays. Clothes hung in her closet as though she might walk in at any moment and pick something to wear for a sunny weekend with friends, but Alicia never came home. Frank exhaled a long breath, dry and heavy with resignation. Last night, over cups of untouched tea and a silence that had become second nature, he and his wife, Elaine, had finally faced the words they had both feared to say out loud. Alicia wasn't coming back. The truth had always been there, gnawing at the edges of their hope, but saying it aloud felt like hammering the final nail into something too sacred to bear. "It's time," Frank whispered, his voice barely audible over the creak of the old floorboards. He opened the window, letting the damp coastal air sweep through the room. It stirred the dust of decades, which danced in shafts of light like tiny, restless spirits. He sneezed, wiped his eyes, and stepped toward the closet. Each item of clothing he pulled from the hanger was a memory made solid. The sky-blue sweater she used to wrap around herself on cool spring evenings, the navy dress she wore to junior prom, still with a faint scent of lavender perfume, a pair of faded jeans patched lovingly by Alicia's own hand, proof of her stubborn independence and quiet creativity. With quiet precision, Frank sorted the garments into boxes, one for donation, one for storage, and one for keepsakes too sacred to part with. But then he reached her desk and hesitated. Lined with school supplies and dog-eared textbooks, it felt like a pause in time, an echo of her ambition. Alicia had been accepted to the University of Oregon, her future aimed toward marine biology, a dream shaped by tide pools, aquariums, and summers spent watching documentaries about the ocean. She had wanted to study life beneath the waves, to understand the mysterious beauty of a world so many ignored. Frank's hand brushed against a hard cover and he paused. A yearbook. One he had never noticed, or perhaps never had the strength to open. In those gut-wrenching days after she disappeared, neither he nor Elaine could bear to look at Alicia's smiling face, frozen in time among the faces of classmates who had all continued forward without her. He sat heavily on her bed, the old mattress giving under his weight, and placed the yearbook on his lap. The leather binding was worn, the corners frayed from teenage hands that had once held it with excitement. Flipping through the glossy pages, he found her senior portrait. Her smile was radiant, alive with promise, framed by waves of chestnut hair. His throat tightened. That smile, so filled with dreams and a spirit no tragedy could erase, made the years collapse in on themselves. 22 years, he whispered, tracing the image of her face with a trembling finger. I need to learn how to carry you in my heart without breaking every time, sweetheart. His gaze wandered to the photograph beside hers. Amy Davidson, Alicia's best friend since grade school, the kind of friend who became family over time. Amy's face sparked memories of laughter that once echoed in their kitchen, late-night sleepovers, and whispered secrets shared under blankets. After Alicia vanished, Amy had visited often, sitting with them in silence, sometimes sharing a story, sometimes just being there. But slowly, inevitably, she had faded from their lives too. Curiosity stirred in Frank's chest. He flipped to the section with individual student bios, snapshots of dreams penned by hopeful teens. When he reached Alicia's page, he read the message she had written at a time when her whole life lay ahead. Thanks to Mom and Dad for always believing in me, to my teachers who pushed me to do better, and to my best friend, Amy. Don't forget to return my book, The Secret Garden, the illustrated classic edition. You old grandma, love you forever. Frank chuckled softly through tears, the old nickname Alicia used for Amy tugging at his heart. That book, it had been one of her favorites, a story of lost things and hidden places that somehow still held the promise of being found. And with that final line, simple, loving, and oddly specific, something shifted in Frank. A quiet nudge inside him whispered, "Look deeper." For the first time in 2 decades, a door that had long been locked inside his grief creaked open, and light began to spill through. Frank chuckled softly, but the sound caught in his throat. A fragile thread stretched between the sweetness of memory and the sting of absence. The playful jab Alicia had written about Amy was so perfectly them, like a preserved echo of the friendship that had once filled their house with laughter. He turned the page, eyes settling on Amy's profile. She had written about dreaming big, staying true to yourself, and fighting for what you believed in. It was a voice full of youthful fire, words that struck Frank more deeply than he'd expected. For a brief moment he could almost hear the girls talking late into the night, whispering plans about college, boys, and the future. Then Alicia's note resurfaced in his mind. Don't forget to return my book, The Secret Garden, illustrated classic edition. That book, her favorite since childhood. She'd cherished it, collecting various editions from flea markets and local bookstores. Frank frowned, suddenly unsure. Had Amy ever returned it? Had he seen it among Alicia's things over the years? He couldn't recall. Driven by the smallest thread of curiosity, he began searching through the boxes of Alicia's belongings. The dust clung to the air, making his eyes sting and his throat dry. Frustrated, he gathered the boxes and moved them to the living room, where the sunlight through the windows made the air easier to breathe. He knelt on the carpet, spreading the books out across the floor. Each one held weight. Science textbooks marked with Alicia's notes, nature magazines with pages dog-eared, fantasy novels with worn spines that testified to multiple readings. But The Secret Garden, the version she mentioned, wasn't there. A quiet wonder stirred in him. Did Amy still have it? And if so, why had she never returned it? What had that book meant to them? On a whim, Frank flipped to the back of the yearbook and found the student contact section. There it was. Amy's scrawled handwriting. Call me anytime. BFF. An old phone number followed, faded but still legible. Frank picked up his phone and dialed without much hope. The number was, as expected, no longer in service. A generic recorded voice echoed his suspicion. Then, just as he was about to try again, the front door creaked open. Elaine stepped in, carrying bags from the farmer's market, her expression shifting from calm to confusion as she saw the scattered mess of books and magazines all over their living room floor. "Frank, what is all this?" Her voice was sharp, tinged with disbelief and something deeper. A buried pain stirred unexpectedly. "I was just going through Alicia's things," Frank replied gently, rising to his feet. "Like we planned." Elaine's face tightened. "We agreed to sort and store them, not drag them out all over the house," she said, her words clipped. "I thought we were finally letting go, not digging through the past again." "I'm not digging," Frank answered quietly. "I found her yearbook. She mentioned a book Amy borrowed. I just wanted to see if it was still here." Elaine set the grocery bags down with a thud. her shoulders stiff. "A book, Frank? After all these years? What does it matter?" He hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. But maybe it's something. Do you know where Amy is these days?" Elaine paused, then nodded. "I see her sometimes in town. She lives in a camper now, just outside the main road. Keeps to herself." Frank's mind was already moving. "I thought maybe I'd visit her. It's been so long. She was like family once." Elaine turned toward him, eyes searching his. "Frank, I can't do that today," she said softly. "I'm not angry at Amy, but I'm not ready to see her either. We agreed last night. We let go. Going to see her now feels like holding on." He nodded, understanding her weariness. "Then I'll go alone." Elaine gave him directions, but her voice was cautious. "Don't push her too hard. Alicia's disappearance, it changed her too." With the yearbook tucked under his arm and guilt weighing heavy on his heart for leaving Elaine with the mess, Frank stepped out into the fog-laced morning. The town of Mornington, draped in mist and memory, greeted him like a silent witness. The drive took him along the familiar, winding coastal roads that clung to the cliffs like old scars. 20 minutes later, he pulled into a humble area dotted with camper vans, where the trees leaned in close and the scent of damp earth filled the air. Some campers looked like they'd been there forever, gardens sprouting beside them, chairs left out for morning coffee. He spotted a man scrubbing the windows of an RV and asked if he knew Amy. "That's her place," the man said, pointing toward a blue and white camper at the far end. "Keeps to herself. Nice lady." Frank approached, heart beating a little faster. A tiny potted plant sat by the door, alive, defiant. He knocked. The door opened. She stood there, older, changed, her once blonde hair now streaked with gray, her features softened by time but still unmistakably Amy. Her expression was polite, cautious. "And can I help you?" she asked, clearly not recognizing him. Frank offered a small, fragile smile. "Amy, it's Frank Sanders, Alicia's father." Her face shifted instantly, recognition, then emotion rushing in. Her eyes welled up with unsaid things. "Oh my God, Mr. Sanders," she breathed. "Please, come in." The camper was compact but warm, filled with the quiet intimacy of a life lived simply. Photographs lined the walls, tiny plants basked in the weak sunlight. She gestured to a small table. "Would you like some coffee?" "Knowing that would be nice," Frank said, settling onto the bench seat. As she moved around the small kitchenette, he could see she was composing herself, her hands steady but slow. "What brings you here after all this time?" she asked as she handed him a warm mug. Frank placed the yearbook gently on the table between them. "I found this today while going through Alicia's room, and I realized I had never really looked through it before." And just like that, the past, long buried and tightly sealed, began to rise between them. Fragile, aching, and waiting to be seen. Amy's eyes locked on the yearbook, her breath catching slightly. "I remember this," she whispered, reaching out to touch the worn cover, like it was a relic from a past life. Frank gently flipped it open to Alicia's profile, pointing to the line about the secret garden. "She mentioned this book," he said. "Did you ever give it back to her?" Amy's lips curved into a wistful, melancholic smile. "No," she admitted. "I didn't. I was such a forgetful girl back then. Alicia always teased me about it." She stood, walked to a low cabinet beneath her bed and rummaged for a few moments. Then, with reverent care, she pulled out a weathered copy of the illustrated edition. "I meant to return it, truly," she said, brushing her fingers over the cover. "But then, after she disappeared, I couldn't part with it. It's the last piece of her I have." She cradled the book like a fragile memory, its pages yellowed, the spines soft from wear. Frank reached for it instinctively, and Amy passed it to him. As he turned the pages, he noticed one had been used as a makeshift bookmark. It wasn't just any scrap. It was a torn sheet from a teen fashion magazine. He unfolded it slowly, revealing a photo spread of young models. One image of a confident boy in designer clothes caught his eye. "Who's this?" Frank asked, gesturing to the photo. Amy leaned closer. "That's Jason Murray. He was in our class. Kind of a big deal back then. He started modeling young, had a following even in high school. I think he owns a fashion label now." Frank blinked in surprise. "Elaine once said you dated Jason," he recalled, though the memory was faint and inconsequential. "Until now." Amy's expression hardened. "That's not true. I never dated Jason. I didn't even like him. Alicia and I both agreed he was trouble." Her tone turned pensive. "They were close for a while, though. During junior year. She never told you?" Frank shook his head, feeling like a stranger to his own daughter's past. "I remember Alicia asking strange questions about him," Amy continued. Stuff like, "Do you think people like Jason can change?" Or, "What if he's just misunderstood?" She even asked me to drive past his house once, just to see where he lived. I thought it was odd at the time, but she always had such a big heart, always looking for the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. "Did the police know about this?" Frank asked, suddenly alert. "Yes. I told them everything. They questioned Jason, like everyone else. But by then, Alicia was dating Brandon Knox. He became their primary suspect, at least for a while." Frank's eyes narrowed as he processed the name. "Brandon? Yeah, I remember him. Seemed nice at first, but we always wondered." "I don't see a will, so if it's a death wish to..." "Left town shortly after Alicia disappeared," Amy added. "Said the suspicion was unbearable." Frank's gaze dropped back to the torn magazine page. Why would Alicia use this as a bookmark, especially if she didn't like him? Amy paused, then chuckled lightly. That was classic Alicia. I remember the day she tore that page out. She hated his guts after some falling out and said, "Nothing better to do with his face than use it to hold my place in a story I actually care about." Frank let the moment sink in. "Do you know where Jason is now?" Amy reached for her phone and scrolled through recent messages. "Our high school alumni group had a reunion last weekend. It was hosted at Jason's house, actually. I didn't go, but they posted his address in the group chat." She showed Frank the screen and he quickly jotted down the location. "Would you mind sending it to me?" he asked. Amy forwarded the details. "Frank, do you think Jason had something to do with Alicia's disappearance?" "I don't know," Frank admitted. "But the fact that Elaine and I knew nothing about him, while Alicia might have been secretly close to him, it just doesn't sit right." He rose to leave, clutching the yearbook once more. Amy touched his arm gently. "Tell Elaine I said hello," she said. "And thank you for letting me keep the book. It's more than a memory, it's her spirit." Frank nodded, touched by her sincerity, then stepped out into the dimming afternoon light. Inside his car, Frank sat motionless. The yearbook lay beside him like a puzzle missing its final piece. Jason Murray. A name from the past now burned into his thoughts. It wasn't just the connection to Alicia. It was the way it had been hidden, unspoken, for decades. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number of Detective Ron Keller, the man who had once led the investigation into Alicia's disappearance. It rang to voicemail. Frank left a brief message, unsure if Keller would even call back. The Sunday silence outside felt heavy with unfinished stories. He looked again at the address Amy had given him. He should go home. That's what he had promised Elaine. They were supposed to pack up, move on. But something gnawed at his conscience. The torn magazine page. Alicia's questions about Jason, her soft heart wrapped in curiosity and compassion. Just a drive-by, he murmured to himself, just a see. The neighborhood he entered 20 minutes later was a world apart from his own. Wide streets lined with pristine lawns and gated homes spoke of lives untouched by grief. Frank spotted the address easily. Jason's home was palatial, elegant, stylish, with a circular driveway and carefully trimmed hedges. He parked discreetly across the street and observed. A man emerged from the front door, tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s. He kissed a young woman on the cheek and walked her to her car. There was no mistaking it. Jason Murray. Then Jason glanced across the street. Frank realized too late that his car's windows weren't tinted. Their eyes met. Jason's posture changed immediately. No longer relaxed, now rigid, guarded. Frank sighed, knowing he'd been seen. He stepped out and approached the gate. "Good afternoon," he called out with forced casualness. "Jason Murray, right?" Jason didn't smile. "Who are you? Why are you watching my house?" His tone was sharp, accusatory. "I'm Frank Sanders, Alicia's father." Jason stiffened. His expression soured. "What do you want?" "I heard there was a reunion here. I'm trying to learn more about Alicia. You were in her class." Jason scoffed. "From Amy? She didn't even show up." "I'm not here to accuse anyone," Frank said, trying to de-escalate. "We just want answers. It's been 22 years. "I was never her boyfriend," Jason snapped. "I barely knew her." "I never said you were. I heard you two talked, that she was curious about you." Jason's voice rose. "If we spoke, it was about borrowing homework. That's it. I told the police everything back then. I don't appreciate being dragged into this again." Frank stayed quiet, observing Jason's defensive body language, rapid movements, eyes darting toward the street. "I have a business, a reputation. I don't need reporters or anyone seeing us talking." Before Frank could say more, Jason turned and strode toward the house. "You should leave," he called over his shoulder. Frank stood there, stunned. The door slammed shut behind Jason. Why such hostility? Why such fear? Frank walked back to his car, his hands trembling. As he gripped the steering wheel, he stared blankly at the street. "What was I thinking?" he whispered. "I told Elaine we'd close this chapter today, not open old wounds." But somewhere inside he knew, some wounds never truly heal, not until the truth is unearthed. Frank started the car, casting one final glance in the rearview mirror toward Jason Murray's sprawling estate. As the house disappeared behind him, a heaviness settled in his chest. He could already imagine the disappointment etched into Elaine's face when he told her, or worse, if she never found out at all but simply felt the emotional distance growing wider. They had made a promise to each other. Today was supposed to be the day they began healing, started packing the pain away, but Frank had been pulled back, like a man caught in undertow, unable to resist the current of unanswered questions that had haunted their lives for over 2 decades. As the miles rolled beneath his tires, he tried to rationalize. Maybe Jason's reaction had been nothing more than annoyance, an average man with something to lose being confronted by a ghost from his past. Who wouldn't be uncomfortable in his shoes? Yet something inside Frank wouldn't let go of the way Jason's face had tensed, the way his voice cracked with controlled panic, the way his eyes darted like a man looking for exits, not truth. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You're chasing shadows," he muttered. "You need to let her go." But the words felt hollow. He had spoken them before, at vigils, in police interviews, through sleepless nights, but never believed them. Not really. Almost without conscious intent, Frank found himself turning off the main road. His car crept into the quiet lot of the Mornington Memorial Funeral Home. The building sat low against the horizon, blanketed in solemn calm. Maybe this was how he could finally keep his word to Elaine. Maybe a service, even without a body, could give them the closure they craved. Inside, a soft-spoken receptionist handed him brochures with gentle hands. He nodded, thanked her, and stepped back out into the light, the thin papers trembling in his grip. Then, across the street, he saw him, Jason. The man was emerging from a hardware store with a shovel and a small wooden box. Frank froze. It was too coincidental. And then, moments later, Jason walked into the floral shop next door and came out with a bouquet of white hyacinths. Frank's breath caught. White hyacinths. Alicia's favorite. His heart began to pound. This wasn't just another errand. Something was happening. Something sacred. Or secret. He slid into his car and started the engine without a second thought. Frank followed from a distance, Jason's car weaving through town until it veered onto the coastal road that led toward Whitlow Cliff. The area was known for its jagged beauty, vacation homes perched like sentinels above the Pacific. Frank watched as Jason turned down a private lane that ended at a small cottage near the cliff's edge. Frank drove past, then circled back, parking under the shelter of trees. From the cover of the brush, he saw Jason unpack his supplies into a small garden trolley. The wooden box, the bouquet, the shovel, and a gallon jug of water. With a quiet urgency, Jason began pushing the cart down a narrow footpath that curved along the cliffs, disappearing behind wild hedges and low pine trees. Frank hesitated only a moment before stepping out, staying low and silent. He moved through the undergrowth, trailing Jason at a distance, his heart thudding with every crunch of earth beneath his feet. The trail opened onto a stunning overlook, where the land dropped sharply into the vast blue. Jason paused near the edge, looking around. He scanned the trees, then began to dig. The ground was rocky and stubborn, but he worked steadily, sweat dotting his brow. Frank crouched behind a boulder, barely breathing. When the hole was about 2 feet deep, Jason set the shovel down and opened the wooden box. He stared inside for a long time, unmoving. Frank couldn't see the contents, but Jason's face was lined with emotion. Sorrow, guilt. His lips moved as if reciting something silently. Then he began to remove the contents. Papers by the look of it, and sifted through them slowly, reverently. A gust of wind blew in off the ocean, snatching the top layer of papers and sending them flying into the air like startled birds. Jason cursed under his breath, scrambling to collect them. After a frantic few moments, he secured the rest and laid the bouquet of hyacinths on top of the box before filling the hole again, pressing down the soil with precision and care. Then, standing over the unmarked grave, he whispered, "I think you can hold these memories now, Alicia." The name hit Frank like a physical blow. He stumbled back involuntarily, his foot dislodging a cluster of loose pebbles. He caught himself against a tree, biting down on a gasp. Panic clawed at his throat. Jason's head snapped up. "Hello?" he called out, voice edged with suspicion. "Is someone there?" Frank didn't move. His body tensed against the trunk, breath shallow. Jason grabbed the shovel, taking a step toward the brush. Frank's mind raced. If he was caught, what would Jason do? After a long pause, Jason muttered, "Just the wind." But his tone held doubt. He circled the clearing, eyes scanning before retreating to the cottage. He leaned the shovel against the wall, climbed into his car, and drove away. Frank waited, counting slowly to 100, then emerged, his knees trembling. He moved toward the site Jason had just buried, every part of him screaming with uncertainty. But something deeper pushed him forward. He retrieved the shovel and dug. The soil, still soft and damp, gave way easily. He set the flowers aside, careful not to damage them, and then unearthed the wooden box. Just as his shovel struck its surface, a voice cracked the air behind him. I knew someone was out there. Frank spun, his heart thudding against his ribs. Jason stood a few yards away, breathing hard, eyes burning. He looked both furious and strangely triumphant. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, stepping closer. "I saw your car up the hill, circled through the woods. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Frank's grip tightened on the shovel. "I heard you say her name, Alicia. What are you burying here, Jason? What does she have to do with this?" Jason's face twisted. "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled. "You shouldn't be here." And in that moment, Frank knew Jason was hiding something bigger than anyone had realized. Frank's hands trembled as he turned back to the partially unearthed wooden box. His heart pounded with dread, but he couldn't stop now. He had to know. "I'm going to find out what's in there," he said, voice tight with resolve. "Stop," Jason barked. He yanked a pistol from his jacket and leveled it at Frank. "Drop the shovel." Frank froze, raising his hands. But instead of fear, a strange calm washed over him. "Go ahead," he said, his voice breaking. "Shoot me if you want. I'll be with my daughter again." Then, with his free hand, he pulled his phone from his pocket. "I'm calling the police. They need to see this." Jason lunged forward, striking the phone from Frank's hand. It slid across the grass, teetering close to the cliff's edge. "No!" Frank shouted. With the desperation of a father fighting time itself, he kicked out and struck Jason's hand, sending the gun tumbling over the cliffside. Then he dove for the phone, catching it a breath before it vanished forever. He didn't hesitate. His thumb slammed the SOS button. The screen lit up, location shared. Help was coming. "Stop this," Frank shouted, backing away. "It's over, Jason. The police are coming. All you can do now is tell the truth." Jason's face crumpled, wild with conflicting emotions. "You don't understand," he yelled. "I still have my whole life ahead of me. My business, my name, everything I built. I can't let this ruin it." Frank's voice shook. "Did you kill my daughter?" The words tasted like acid. "If you loved her, why?" Jason faltered. His eyes glistened with unshed rage and confusion. I didn't know what I felt for her," he stammered. "She should have known better. She should have stayed away. She pushed me." Frank reeled. "She was a child," he whispered, horrified. "You didn't know her," Jason snapped, his voice rising with a manic edge. "She kept coming back, always coming back." "Then why didn't you say anything when she went missing?" Frank shouted. "Why bury all this like a grave?" Jason's eyes burned. "She betrayed me," he roared, then surged forward, striking Frank with the shovel and grabbing him by the throat. The older man's knees buckled. His vision flickered as Jason's fingers tightened. But then, sirens, wailing in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. Jason faltered, glancing back in alarm. The grip loosened. "Step away from him now," a voice commanded. Police cars burst onto the property. Officers spilled out, guns drawn, hands where we can see them. Jason dropped the shovel, his face blank with disbelief. 2 officers tackled him, cuffing him as they recited his rights. Frank collapsed to the earth, gasping, hands cradling his throat. A female officer rushed to his side. "Sir, are you okay?" He nodded, rasping, "Thank you." As Jason was led away, Frank pointed to the disturbed earth. He buried something. He said Alicia's name. "My daughter, Alicia Sanders. She's been missing for 22 years. The officers exchanged glances. One turned to a detective now on the scene. Detective Ramirez stepped forward. "Sanders, I remember that case. Let's secure this area." As officers roped off the site and forensic techs prepared to dig, Ramirez handed Frank his phone. "Start from the beginning," she said gently. Frank did. The yearbook. Amy. The cottage. The bouquet. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. "I know I shouldn't have followed him, but when I saw the shovel and the flowers, they were Alicia's favorite. Something told me." Ramirez nodded. "You said he buried something?" Frank pointed. "A box, flowers, and he said Alicia could hold these memories now." And forensic team moved in. Slowly, with meticulous care, they uncovered the hyacinths, still pristine. Beneath them, the box. Inside was a collection of yellowed papers, old photographs, handwritten notes, and a handmade wool doll. A child craft. Frank's breath hitched. Ramirez lifted a stack of printed text messages between Jason and Alicia. "This confirms they had a relationship," she said. "One that appears emotionally manipulative." Frank leaned closer. The messages showed Jason's push and Alicia's pull. Her heartbreak, her hope, her belief that he could change. "She believed in him," Frank whispered. "She thought she could save him." The messages soured. Alicia tried to end it. Jason's replies turned desperate, obsessive. Then came the photos. Frank recoiled, staggering back. Alicia restrained, her eyes wide with fear. The photos were marked, Jason's handwriting. One simply read, "You must still love me," scrawled over and over. Another, "Had a great time at the cliffs with you." And the last, her terrified face and Jason's confession. She refused to talk things out. Ramirez read aloud, "I had to kill her." The forensic team continued working. Then, "Detective," one of them called out. About 15 feet from the initial site, the soil was different. They began to dig. Moments later, bone fragments emerged. Frank collapsed to his knees, hands shaking violently. After 22 years, the truth had clawed its way into the light. Ramirez crouched beside him. "Do you want us to call your wife?" Frank could barely speak. "Yes. And Amy, she deserves to know." An hour later, Elaine arrived. She ran into Frank's arms, sobbing. Amy came soon after, her face streaked with tears. Together, the three stood on the cliff, watching the recovery of Alicia's remains. Elaine turned to the detective, her voice steel under grief. "We want to take her from here. She deserves better than this, somewhere peaceful." "We'll arrange it," Ramirez said. Amy moved toward the uncovered bones, weeping. "Why didn't you tell me, Alicia? We talked about guys like him. We laughed about it. You knew I would have helped." As the sun dipped behind the ocean, casting a golden hue across the land, the three stood as sentinels of a memory finally laid bare. Frank took Elaine's hand. "She's coming home," he whispered. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "She's finally coming home." A week later, beneath a rare cloudless Oregon sky, a small flotilla of boats gathered quietly off the rugged coastline of Mornington, just below Whitlow Cliff. The sun cast shimmering diamonds across the water's surface, the gentle waves lapping against the hulls in a rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. In the lead boat stood Frank and Elaine Sanders, solemn but composed, their faces weathered by grief yet softened by peace. Amy Davidson stood beside them, and with them were Detective Ron Keller, pulled from retirement not by duty but by heart, and Detective Ramirez, the quiet force who had guided them through the darkest closure of their lives. Behind them, boat after boat filled the waters. Alicia's former classmates, old friends, former teachers, and community members who had mourned her in silence for 2 decades. Word of Jason Murray's arrest and Alicia's discovery had rippled through the town like a storm tide, unearthing old sorrow and forcing it to the surface, but also creating space for long overdue healing. Frank stood at the bow, cradling a small urn in his hands. After many late-night conversations filled with tears and reflection, he and Elaine had chosen not to lay Alicia in a cemetery, not to place her spirit in earth. Alicia had loved the sea, its depth, its freedom, its mystery. It had inspired her dreams, soothed her fears. The ocean had always been her sanctuary. Today, the minister began, his voice echoing across the water. We gather to say goodbye to Alicia Sanders. For 22 years, her family and friends have carried the burden of her absence, the agony of not knowing. But today, we lay that burden down. We set her spirit free. Elaine stepped forward, her hand tightening on Frank's arm. Her voice, though fragile, rang clear and certain. Alicia loved this ocean. She was going to be a marine biologist. She would have spent her life here, among the waves, studying its beauty, protecting its life. This is where she belongs, not in pain, not in memory, but in freedom. Frank opened the urn slowly. Together, with trembling hands, they scattered Alicia's ashes into the sea. A soft breeze carried them outward, where the sunlight caught each grain in a final shimmer. One by one, from every boat, mourners tossed white hyacinths into the waves, Alicia's favorite flower, until the sea bloomed into a floating garden of remembrance. Then Amy stepped forward, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She held the worn copy of The Secret Garden, the one she had kept all those years. With a quiet goodbye, she laid it gently onto the water. "I'm sorry I never returned your book," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Goodbye, my friend." As the boats turned back toward shore, Detective Ramirez approached Frank and Elaine. She spoke softly, respectfully. "Jason has confessed," she said. Her voice was calm, but the words struck like thunder. She explained that Jason had held Alicia captive in the cliffside cottage for several days after graduation. His obsession had grown in silence, warped by rejection and control. He had convinced himself that they belonged together, that if she would just break up with Brandon and claim she had left for a solo trip, they could be together, publicly, finally. But Alicia had refused. With bravery and clarity, she told him he was broken, that love was not possession, and that she no longer believed he could change. Those words, Ramirez said, had driven Jason into a rage. When Alicia tried to escape, a violent struggle ensued. At the cliff's edge, she nearly managed to push him away, but he overpowered her. He struck her, again and again, until her body stilled. Then, terrified, he buried her, hoping no one would ever find out. Amy, sobbing quietly, turned to Frank and Elaine. "I remember when she asked me if people like Jason could change," she said, voice barely audible. "I thought it was just curiosity. I didn't know they were involved. I should have known. I should have protected her." Elaine reached out and held her. "Amy, listen to me. None of this was your fault. Jason used Alicia's kindness against her. She believed she could help him, and he used that to trap her. That's on him, not you." Detective Keller, eyes rimmed with age and regret, added, "We never saw it. He had no record, no public relationship with her. Our attention was on Brandon. And Jason, he just kept living." As they docked, Frank lingered at the rail, staring at the bobbing hyacinths drifting on the water's surface. The pain was still there, sharp, searing, but something had shifted. The ache had a name now, a face, an ending. That evening, Frank and Elaine sat side by side on their back porch, the sun setting in rich hues of gold and rose. Between them was a candid photo of Alicia, not the posed yearbook portrait, but one from a summer afternoon. She was laughing, barefoot in the sand, her hair whipped wild by the sea wind, alive, glorious. "I think we can move forward now," Elaine said softly, fingers curled around Frank's. "Not by forgetting her," she added, "but by remembering her as she truly was." Frank nodded, squeezing her hand. "She was so much like you. That deep well of compassion, the belief that people could be better." Elaine smiled through her grief. "And she had your stubbornness. Once she believed someone was worth saving, she wouldn't give up." They fell silent, but the quiet was no longer hollow. It was full of shared memory, of a daughter lost, of love unshaken, of a future they would carry forward together. "I keep thinking about how young she was," Frank said after a long pause. "She believed in the goodness of people, even the broken ones. She thought love could fix anything." "It's not a bad belief," Elaine answered. "The world could use more of it. Alicia's only mistake was thinking she could fix someone who didn't want to be saved." Frank nodded slowly. "I just wish she had told us." "We'll never know what might have been," Elaine said gently. "But I believe she knows now how much we loved her, and that we never stopped looking." As darkness settled over Mornington, stars bloomed across the sky like lights returning to a long, dark stage. Frank looked up, thinking about the journey that had begun with a yearbook and a forgotten note about a borrowed book. That simple memory had cracked open a truth buried for 22 years, and now, finally, the sea held Alicia, not in secret, but in light. She was home, and Frank and Elaine, holding each other in the hush of evening, would begin again, not forgetting, but remembering with love. They would live, and they would heal, together.